Hi, my name is Carla Alexandra Rodriguez. I am a Venezuelan American artist living and working in St. Paul, Minnesota. I work predominantly with a Civil War era photo process called tintype or wet plate. It's a chemical based process and it results in a one of a kind, 100% unique object. Kind of think about it sort of like a Polaroid, different chemical process, but where everything is happening on the surface of the object rather than like making a print or that kind of thing. So I usually start out with a piece of black aluminum and do a couple of steps chemically that make it light sensitive, and then I shoot that with a tremendous amount of light on my camera, and then take that back into the darkroom, develop it, and then bring it back out. And then at that point, I fix it so that way the image doesn't change at all. And then there's a couple more steps to prep the surface to make it archival. But otherwise, I end up with a finished product that kind of looks like this. They're really awesome, really cool handmade objects. So part of what drew me to this process was the aspect of like being able to make something with my hands, especially in this age of photography where everything is reproducible and lives on our screens and that kind of thing. So this process was really attractive to me because it made me feel like I was actually physically making something. And also each image is like intensely unique, and it's hard to reproduce from one to the other the same chemical anomalies or even like the same pose, because it is a completely different image to image. So that's kind of the physical aspect of my process. As far as how it relates to the show and the theme of the show, I have always been attracted to artwork that and artists who are really open and vulnerable with their content or with themselves, in a combination of those two things. I kind of call it like too much information artwork, or TMI artwork, where it's like just being really revealing about the artist's lived experiences, or letting the content of the work or the person who's the concentration of the content of the work kind of speaks for themselves and be vulnerable. So specific to the artwork in the show, I'm exploring the body as well as shibari, which is a rope technique used in the BDSM community. And it's very constructed and artful, and it can be obviously very vulnerable for the person being tied as well as the person who is tying. And I was really attracted to the visual of this as well as the mental implication, and just kind of exploring poses as well as the body, as well as kind of the metaphors being used with rope play and with the models and with this process. So that's kind of how I'm relating to it at this point, with this process and with the content. As far as the rest of my work goes, I tend to try and, I don't know, I tend to make things that are more, I guess, anecdotal, or more based on my lived experiences. So I feel like a little bit this work is a little bit outside of myself, or looking at others rather than myself a little bit more. But I do find that the rest of my work is really kind of related personally to my lived experiences. So so this is kind of like new for me, and also I think very vulnerable, like kind of thinking outside of myself or looking at people outside of myself more, as I use this work to explore that. So thank you for listening. If you want to follow me on Instagram, my handle is BLKKHAND, Black Hand. I do commissioned portraits as well in this process, in my studio space, as well as at events and that kind of thing. So if you want to do that, that'd be cool. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Heidi Blunt. I live in Superior, Wisconsin, and work over in Duluth, Minnesota. My work for this show is a bunch of blubbies. Big, fat, puffy, inviting forms. I think I want to demystify what the human form is, and it comes from a place of vulnerability. My work in the last few years about figuring out how to share fatness in a joyful way has been vulnerable, and what's been revolutionary to me about this process or any growth or healing that's come to me from it has come from a realization that I can't be worried about the validation of others anymore. When I'm going through and making work or thinking about making work, I try and let go of where is this work going to live, who's going to want it, what value does it have in the world. Getting rid of those problems and ideas and halting being able to make and make more work has been the revolutionary thing about being vulnerable, who I am and what I want to share with the world. So thanks for coming to the show. I invite you to touch and puff the blubbies. Thanks again.
My name is Meg Brown. I'm a queer artist living and working in Minneapolis. I work mostly with clay and words. However, as you'll see in the pieces that I've chosen for this show, I use whatever I can to express my feelings. The pieces I've chosen for this show are tough. The monster in my bed is where it all starts, my story of abuse. I never learned how to talk about what happened to me, and I never learned how to open up. Vulnerability was never an option for me. The sexual abuse I endured as a child has greatly shaped almost every aspect of my life, and it wasn't until I confronted myself, or really forgave myself, that I realized just how much damage it caused. Things I have to deal with every day, like my learning disability, my eating disorder, PTSD, night sweats, night terrors, and the list goes on. Because of this, I've always had a hard time being intimate or trusting other people with my emotions. I don't make art because I'm inspired to, but more I'm compelled to. It's urgent. When I'm working on an emotional piece, I kind of leave my body. Sometimes I don't really know what it is I'm making. I work until I feel better, until I can breathe again. I use art as a way to cope, as a way to survive. If you have any questions on any of the pieces that you've seen today, feel free to ask me. You can find me on Instagram at artisdirty.
Hi, my name is Stacy Combs, aka Stace of Spades. I am an artist and illustrator based out of Minneapolis, Minnesota. I've been doing this whole art thing pretty much my whole life, and I've been taking myself seriously since about 2015. I do a lot of painting. Watercolor and gouache are my poisons for sure. I do a lot of portrait work, but also a little design work here and there. I used gouache for all of the paintings that you're going to see in this exhibition today, and it's pretty much been my go-to for all of my body positive work, which you will also see a lot of today. This video that you're watching is me painting the 20th portrait in my Body Positive series. Something that I originally had intended to give a better name to, but it's just kind of stuck. I've been working on this series for a little over 2 years now. It features real women, femme-identifying people, trans people, non-binary people, and genderqueer people. So basically just not cis men, because they get enough of the spotlight as it is. The whole goal with this thing is to normalize and diversify the representation that we see of bodies everywhere, all the time. I really hope that the more different body types that we see, the better we'll all feel about our bodies in general. We all have a body, all bodies are weird, and I think that that's really beautiful. There's an incredible amount of vulnerability that goes into this project. I mean, it's boobs and butts and people's bodies. Of course there is. I mean, it all started out with me posting my own body, and now people send me nudes, and that takes a lot of strength. People aren't just sharing their bodies, they're sharing their experiences, and I think that really makes this work more relatable. A painting of a 4-kid mom bod, or cellulite, or someone wearing a binder says a lot, and I really hope that it all makes people feel more included and familiar. I don't think that painting bodies should be a political thing. That just seems wild to me. We all live in a body. But this type of vulnerability absolutely is revolutionary, especially right now. And I think the more vulnerable we are, the more relatable that we become. And when we open ourselves up like this, we can only become more open-minded too. I think that this vulnerability is essential in building each other up and approaching our differences from a place of love. We all have more in common than we might think we do, especially if we're not all represented. So thanks for coming to the show and for having an open mind and heart and for being a part of this awesome thing.
Hi, I am Alana Schwartzman. I am a letterpress printer in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and I have a studio that features a collection of hundreds of fonts of hand-set metal and wood type. This is individual letters that get set and composed piece by piece to create a message or to tell a story. A lot of the type that I have is antique, some of it dating to the late 1800s. And I print using the same methods and the same antique printing presses that were used to create books and newspapers and handbills and broadsides before the advent of computers. And so my work is very personal often, and vulnerability plays a key role because as an artist, you're always vulnerable, right? You're always putting something of yourself out there whenever you create. But I like to try to take it a step further because my work is text-based. To generate kind of messages and ideas that I think are important to share based on my values. And I have a storefront space in Minneapolis, and I have created statements and put them up in the window to generate conversation and make people stop and think. And that's a real sense of power that I get from that capability. You know, there's an old quote that says the freedom of the press belongs to those who own one. And so I take that power that I hold as a printmaker very seriously. and that vulnerability that I put forward by making a platform for my ideas is also a privilege. And so I tend to think of it that way. I love to use bright colors and textures that bring out the unique characteristics of this antique type, and I'm thrilled to be included in this exhibition.
Hi, my name is Marissa. I am a LA-born, Chicago-based queer event and portrait photographer. I have 6 photos in this group show from an ongoing series called Photos of You. In this series, I have asked volunteers to come forward and let me kind of pull the sheets back on otherwise private, intimate moments in their lives and with their loved ones, or people that they are intimate with in a wide variety of relationship models. I've done a lot of portrait photography in the past, and what I've found is that you can't coax or coach a moment of intimacy into fruition. You have to get in the headspace with your models or collaborators, as I consider them, in order to all be there and create that image in its truthfulness together. I do think I've accomplished that here, and I think there's some really beautiful images that I'm really proud of. But, you know, they're not images that I wanted to live in frames or tucked away in nightstands. You know, there's a time and a place for that. But these images I wanted to exhibit and to make more visible these non-traditional relationship models that I think carry as much weight as, you know, the kind that they only show you on TV, the more traditional love, and things like that. So I'm celebrating and trying to give validity to non-monogamy, openness, and platonic intimacy. Those are all super important and valid ways to love. So that's what I'm trying to show here. I think it's a radical way to live in a system where that's not celebrated as much as it should be. So yeah, it's important for me for these images to be big, to be soft, fluid, tactile, which is why they're printed on silk. And I love them. I think that they're really beautiful. I'm really proud of them. I wanted to end this little video with a quote from Laura Mathis that I think kind of sums up how I try to live my life and what I try to create in my artworks. And here's the quote. Embrace vulnerability. Use emotionality as a radical tactic against a society that teaches you that emotions are a sign of weakness. I think that that's what this series and what a lot of what this group show is all about. Thanks.
My name is Oliver Schminke, and I create ceramics under the name Sick Kitty Ceramics. A lot of my work is a little scary, or maybe a lot scary, depending on your scariness threshold. I'm a huge fan of surrealism and body horror. I think it's a really cool way to get people to think about an object differently. And to think about their relationship with that object and their emotions when they're dealing with that object. As a transgender artist, vulnerability is really crucial to me in all of my work. I feel like even just saying that I'm trans is sometimes a vulnerable act, which feels kind of silly here in 2019 to feel like that's something that I still have to hide sometimes, but it definitely is. I mean, especially when I'm out at all of these different craft markets and stuff selling my work, you interact with a lot of different people and you don't always know exactly where they're coming from. But I think that vulnerability is really, really crucial to art making. For me, when I think of the purpose of good art, I think about the ways in which art can connect people through emotions And I think that in order for the viewer to feel like they can be vulnerable and really interact with your artwork in a vulnerable way for them, you first have to be vulnerable. And I see this time and time again in my work as an artist and as a poet. When you are first vulnerable, it's really amazing the things that people will give you back. When you first share something about yourself that's meaningful to you, people feel much, much more open to sharing things back. And I think a lot about our work as artists and as people on this planet, building a better life for each other. And I think that vulnerability is really at the core of that.
Hi, my name's Joni Van Bockel. I'm based out of Minneapolis, Minnesota. I have 3 drawings in the show Honestly Though at Prove. I've been working on this series of drawings for almost 5 years now. It's probably the most personal series of work that I've worked on, because it's been a way for me to meditate on and become more comfortable with my own body. The repetition and the pattern is really a meditation. It's a way to think about these shapes and these forms. Somewhere along the line, someone taught me that we find beautiful what we are familiar with, and I think the only way to become more comfortable and appreciate things that we don't necessarily appreciate is to see those shapes and those figures over and over and over again. And that is a vulnerable thing for me. It's something I've struggled with for a long time. I grew up in a community that believed that your body was very separate from who you were. There's this very physical, spiritual separation, and I think that left me feeling in some ways very disconnected and very uncomfortable in my own skin. And so as an adult, it's kind of been a relearning of how to embrace my body as fully part of myself, as a very intimate and beautiful part of myself, and as like a whole part. But yeah, I do think one of the questions you asked was if vulnerability was revolutionary. And I do think vulnerability can be an act of rebellion. I think it can be a way of standing up for yourself by showing aspects and talking about things you've been told to keep hidden or to hide away or keep small. I think that can be a very powerful act of rebellion against the people and corporations and whatnot in power who profit off of keeping you silent about those things. So yeah, I think vulnerability can be a very powerful thing. Thank you.